Thanks so much. All right, can everyone hear me? Good. Yes, great. So I'm Andrew. I'm the product lead for the Search and Explore team within Google Maps. So searching for businesses, finding out when they're open, finding out which restaurant to go to. That's my team, and that's what we really focus on. So I wanted to come here today and talk to all of you about how we think about measuring how much we're helping people with maps and measuring where we're able to help people more. Get into that space of sort of real world conversions and measuring those more complex journeys that go from the digital into the real world. So just to start setting some of the baseline about Google Maps is truly a global product. We're launched and provide maps in more than 220 countries and territories. And that doesn't mean just having Street View, traffic, the roads, businesses, but also building for people in all of these different countries. So though we might think about something like brunch on an average Sunday morning, that's not necessarily true in every country. And so it means finding out what these different cultures are and how to build for success for all of those different people. In terms of how Maps is used globally, and also we're really building that across desktop and mobile, trying to help you either when you're planning your day, sitting at your desk, or out and around on your phone, actually looking at the map. We try to provide the best experience to help you get things done out there in the real world. Now, one of the ways Maps is used, of course, is navigation. And every day we see about 1 billion kilometers or more being navigated through the world with maps. Additionally, we work with and provide information from over 10,000 transit agencies, really trying to help people get to work and get home faster, understand their commute and how to get back and forth. And closer to home for me, we have information from over 150 million businesses that we provide through Maps. And through all those different sorts of information, over 1 billion people come to Google Maps to find out information about the real world. So there's a real breadth of people coming here and different things that they're doing with Google Maps. And so how do we understand their success? How do we understand the conversions that happen within Maps? Well, hopefully this looks somewhat familiar to a lot of you. We think about sort of that standard conversion flywheel. So starting off with how do we build awareness? How do we engage our users? How do we let them know what they can actually do with Maps? What's the journey they're taking through the product? How are we assisting them along the way? What sort of friction are they running into? And then the important part of this, which I think has been new in the past couple years, is how do we really win their trust? How do we win them to come back and retain them into the product? Because that's really the way that you're going to grow, is not just marketing, not just advertising, but also that sort of word of mouth that comes from that earned trust in your product and earned trust in the products that you're selling. So get them to advocate for you so that more people come to the product and they come back each time. Now, going into some specific examples of this. And of course, a lot of this is digital. So we're really looking at how are they going through the product, but it gets complicated as you transition really into that real world, going out and about and all the different things that people are doing. And so getting some examples of that, let's consider booking a hotel. Now, there's a lot of that digital space that we can see. We can see when people come in, they say type in hotels on Google or Google Maps, are searching for a hotel, are looking at destinations, browsing lists, starting to make those lists, save them, share them with someone they're going on the trip with, and finally, hopefully, clicking that button to make a purchase of a hotel room and actually make that kind of conversion on the digital side. Now, of course, there's also that whole journey beyond that of actually going on the trip. Was the hotel room clean? Was the bed comfortable? Did they really enjoy that stay? And I think that's part of their overall journey. It doesn't stop when they make that booking. Now, looking into another different one, let's say, we'd help that person with some transit directions, but they got home a little late because the MTA was slightly delayed, don't have time to cook dinner, and they're looking to get delivery. Well, this is another thing that people come to Google Maps for a lot. And it, again, can start out with them expressing that intent about wanting to find some place to get delivery from, maybe looking for restaurants that are near them, provide delivery, looking through the menu, discussing, and finally maybe clicking that call button, asking, and calling up the business to say, hey, when can you deliver? How long is it going to take? And that's an action that we can see. But again, there's that big part of that journey about, did it get delivered quickly? Was the food still hot when it got there? Did they enjoy it? That it's really hard for us to measure digitally. And then kind of even going further down, let's say that they need to buy, a new shirt. Maybe they'll come to Maps, search for clothing stores, but there's no real conversion action that's happening there. They're really just looking up information and then going out into the real world, comparing different options, showing up, and making that decision about what to buy. So there's this whole breadth of different sort of tasks that people are taking with the map. And some of them have harder conversion actions within the digital space, but some of them are really happening more in the real world. So it's very difficult to have sort of one unified model to describe all of these and understand your conversions, your retention, your engagement across them. So it's really important to kind of break this out into your sub-journeys. And this is something we focus on a lot in a product as broad and complex as Maps, is what are those different sub-journeys that we really care about? And this is important for a couple reasons. Again, you're not necessarily going to have one theory that crosses all of getting delivery, going out to a store to buy clothes, and booking a hotel, let alone actually the other side of Maps of orienting, getting directions. But you can focus in on, say, just that hotel journey and really give a team that focus. And that gives the team agency over what they're doing and also lets us dive in a little bit deeper to really understand that retention flywheel. So getting into that hotel example, this is something from Think with Google from I think a couple years ago now. But one of the things I want to call attention to is this number of 3 months. And we still see this today with a lot of travel planning. It's a very inspirational, aspirational exercise where people are looking through a lot of information, coming, issuing lots of searches. You know, it's not just sort of one 20-minute session that's happening within Maps. It's a really complicated task with a really high bar for making that decision that happens over a long time period. And so it's going to be really important to go through and understand what's happening throughout those 3 months. You really need to look at what's that sort of ideation stage, that whole journey, understand what the different points throughout those 3 months are, all the way through to booking. And that's not even speaking about, are we winning back advocacy? Are we getting people to sort of advocate for Maps as the place to come and do this? And one of the reasons that I say it's so important to understand all the steps in that 3 months is let's consider trying to run an A/B test to see if we are making an improvement here. That A/B test is only going to cover a very small portion of this journey, especially if it's, you know, your standard, like say 2 weeks that you run this and then decide, oh, we want to launch this feature, or no, this doesn't seem to be working out. If this is more top of the funnel, it's say trying to raise engagement for using Maps to book a hotel, you're not going to see those end of the funnel metrics over this 3-month journey within a 2-week time span. And so that's why it's really important to dive in, understand what's happening in each space along the way, and have a lot of senses of what are the metrics that indicate success or failure along the way, rather than just sort of that end of the funnel conversion action. And so you need to go from that kind of top line we talked about with how many people are coming to Maps, into those journeys like hotels, and then down into the tasks that are happening along this journey. And for those of you like me who fall into the middle management category, this is something hopefully you can feel good about providing to your teams. Like, this is really what middle managers, I think, are there for, is to provide that connection from that real like detailed small piece up to that overarching picture, to give teams agency, but also connect it up to what you're trying to do overall. So that's a nice kind of framework of how to think about it, but I want to talk about how we actually apply that into identifying opportunity in Maps and some of the tools and approaches that we use to understand where can we help people in those flywheels, where do we have opportunities, where can we improve this and sort of grow usage of Maps and make Maps more helpful to people in general. So one of the big ones that I would say, of course, is metrics. You know, we're Google, we focus a lot on what are the clicks, what are people looking at, how are they interacting. But even more than metrics, and I think more and more today, is focusing on empathy and building empathy with the people coming to and using your product. And this is important because without that empathy, those numbers aren't going to mean anything. You really need to understand if that click is worthwhile, if it actually signals success or failure. So really, I just want to drive home, the more you can focus on sort of that qualitative side of research in the conversion funnel, I think the more and better results you're going to have. So a couple of the tools we use to approach to building that empathy. One thing I always ask all the product managers on my team to do first is look at anonymized sessions. And so here you can see sort of what are people doing in the product, how are they flowing through it. Maybe they started in one position, click to a different page, take a specific action. You see this flow and can kind of tell a story of how someone is getting through the product. I ask them to continue looking at a few more developing some theories for how this is happening. And once you've looked at a sort of large number, you might start to see some patterns emerging. And the nice thing about doing this with sessions is at the same time you're looking through sort of what's happening with these anonymized users, you can also then just look at your logs overall and look at how often that pattern is occurring. So you both have developed that empathy and a way to identify it. And so you can really quantitatively see, oh, is this a meaningful opportunity? Does it happen frequently, or is this just sort of a one-off piece? Giving an example, one thing we were trying to focus on, I think last year, was helping people find attractions, understand that they could use maps to go and look for, that great thing to do in a city when they're traveling. And so looking through sessions, we started seeing some behavior kind of along the lines of people would, open up the map, browse around and click on something. So this would be in Boston, say, click on the Chinatown Gate, great attraction. They'd browse around a little more, click on the Boston Tea Party, Ship and Museum, another great attraction. And they'd keep panning around the map more and more, clicking on individual different places. And one of the other product managers on our team had the insight that we're seeing this behavior happen where people are really clicking around on a bunch of the same types of places, but we have this ability to show people a full list of just what the attractions that are available are. And so he pushed for this change about really surfacing something that said, hey, once we see that initial action in that sort of session sequence, can we hint at what tools we have that are available to you? So here was adding this just button that says see nearby museums or see nearby restaurants, see nearby attractions to help you quickly click on that and jump into that list view that lets you see which ones are open, go to the top rated ones, or see all of them at once. And we saw that this really helped a lot of the users coming in to quickly jump in and make decisions much faster than sort of just clicking around on the base map, which has all sorts of different icons. Another one that I think we're focusing on a lot today is understanding cohorts. And so what I mean by that is looking at people who came into your app, say, for the first time at the same time, or sort of in the same general day, and really looking to understand the users who love your product and really are going to advocate for you or having a lot of success with it, and look for the people who maybe are a little frustrated with it or are not quite as happy. And the nice thing here is if you can understand the differences in what led to people being really excited about using your product or really frustrated, it can give you some insights into what to lean into, what to recommend to people, how to get people more excited about using it. So look at the distribution of what they're interacting with, and you might see, oh, there's this difference in, say, some sort of feature that they're interacting with. We should recommend that more. So to make that a little more concrete, let's consider the place sheet, which is what we call the view of a business within Maps. Perhaps we look at people who, say, came into place sheet for the first time, so they're sort of starting off from the same place. You want to get your cohort of people to be in kind of the same setting as they're coming in to really compare them appropriately. And look at what different actions they took. And maybe we see this distribution for the just average set of users, where a lot of them click on directions and some small portion of them click on the save button. But then the key is, with that cohort, look at the people who came back a lot of times. So let's say we look at people who came back 3 times in the next week. And we see, oh, similar interaction with directions. Maybe they interact with that save button a lot more. This could lead us to saying, hey, maybe we should promote something saying like, hey, try saving this place for later, because we think that that leads to people having a more successful experience. The map is more personalized for them, and they see a lot more value when they come back, so they come back more frequently. Now, I want to call out, this is obviously very much a correlative study. This isn't a causal change that you're seeing. So this is a place to generate a lot of hypotheses. This isn't necessarily going to give you the answer, and you need to experiment with a bunch of different things to see, does this play out? Can we help people discover this or help people get into this flow? And is that actually what's driving that retention? Or is it something else that's really contributing to more people being retained within the map? One of the third things, and I can't say this enough, just ask your users. And there are a lot of different ways to do this, because you can look at those metrics, the sessions, everything else all day, but you're bringing sort of your own assumptions to that. Whereas when you're asking users, you can really get to the motivation behind their actions. You can really understand why did they take that action? What are they feeling frustrated with? What are they feeling excited about? And so two approaches to this that I've used a lot are both scaled surveys and in-person user interviews. And so on the scaled survey front, this is something that I think has been incredibly valuable to us. There are a lot now of online survey providers. You can target your surveys to people who use your product, maybe interact with something specific, and really get scaled understanding of how they're interacting with it. And so as an example of this, let's go back to looking at that place sheet and say we're trying to understand whether we're helping people with the task of finding and deciding on a restaurant or somewhere to go for lunch. So you get those people who have come in and looked at this place sheet, send that over through a survey, and ask some screening questions. And this is really important because then you can focus in on the people who are actually trying to take that task you were looking for. Say you're focusing on going out for lunch, you want to filter down to just those people rather than folks who maybe were coming here to call and get delivery or some other task like that. So screening down to the people who are really of interest to your task and really focused on doing that. Through that, then you have only your sort of qualified users, and you can ask them a lot of questions. This is just the highest level example, but about their satisfaction with that experience. And that's a great way to understand, are they feeling good about this journey? For subparts of the journey, are they feeling like that was giving them the information they needed? Where were they frustrated? Where were they feeling really excited about it? And beyond that, you can also take these, because you're doing this in sort of this online way tied to the user, to go back to their session and see, oh, they took a bunch of different actions, and correlate those actions with their self-report of user success. And so this becomes really important later when you're trying to understand your metrics, because you want that user report and user understanding of were they actually successful versus did they just click on something. And this can give you a lot of insight into how to interpret it without only bringing your own approach and your own bias to the table. Again, though, in-person interviews, they often take much more time than each of those responses to an online survey, but they're also super, super valuable because you can really dig in, really ask a lot of follow-up questions, and understand in detail what someone was doing, where they were hitting frustration points, and what are those opportunities that you may not have even thought of to make your product better. So one that we did, I think a year or two ago, was similarly focused on that case of helping people understand that they could issue categorical queries. So meaning a category of places like ATMs, gas stations, restaurants, in maps. And we sat down with people, asked them to engage in this task of searching for a category of places or deciding between a place. So this is one example where we asked someone to consider that they needed to go to a pharmacy, and how would they use maps to decide which pharmacy to go to. Well, this participant started typing out pharmacy, saw there was these suggestions, and clicked on the second one. There was a pharmacy on Nordstrand Ave. Clicked on the last one, said, oh, maybe this one's actually too far, I'm not interested. Clicked on a third one, and they were going back and forth clicking on all of these different suggestions of individual pharmacies. And so the nice thing here is, well, if you're seeing this in a session or in an online survey, you're not necessarily going to be able to ask, why is this behavior happening? In my mind, I was thinking, why are they not clicking on this first one, which will show them a list of pharmacies? And the key thing here also that I want to point out is this is not that the user is getting anything wrong. Whenever a user is confused in a study like this, it is your problem. It is your opportunity to make your product better and make it clearer to that person. So it's really about approaching this as a way for you to see just how bad of a job you have done in making that perfect product and where you can get a lot better. So we asked this, and the user said, well, I saw that, but I thought that was just saying, oh, we understand what you want to search for, and now we're showing you the results right below, which was not something I would have ever considered had I seen this in sessions or just been looking through user behavior. So really digging in with that user was really important for getting that insight of, oh, they just don't know that they can actually view a list of places in maps in other ways. And that was one of the things that led to our recent redesign, really focusing on surfacing some of these categorical searches front and center within maps, because we found that people understood often how to get directions, how to get to an individual business, but really had very little awareness that you could come in and do some of these more categorical broad queries within maps. So this was helping people to jump into that task rather than having to go through individual businesses to compare them. So we've got some ways to assess where we have headroom, where we can improve the product, where we've messed up and confused our users. Going to run some experiments, try some new things out. And when you do that, of course, you really want to assess the success of that experiment. You want to understand, are you doing the right thing? And though I skipped over this earlier, metrics are really, really important here. I always want my teams to have a hypothesis of what they're moving, make sure that we will be able to measure it with that experiment, and make sure we can move it in the right direction. So let's consider again the case where we talked about, directions was an okay action, but saving really led to people coming back to this play sheet frequently over the next couple weeks. So what's something we can do to, say, get people to save this place more? Well, maybe we just make a really big save button on this play sheet. I think that's going to work. How do people feel about this experiment? Think it's going to be good? I think the laughter is that this is a foolish one. So yeah, this is really being a dramatic example of over-optimizing for something. You're dropping a lot of other things on the floor if you're just thinking about saving. And I bet this experiment would drive up people clicking on the save button, but it would lose a lot of other things. You'd lose all that information about the address, about the hours of whether to go to it. And so though we don't really want to build the cockpit of a 747 when we're doing user experience design, for metrics, this can be really good. You really want to have that comprehensive view of what's happening in your product. You want to have the understanding of the interaction with hours, the understanding of people looking for that address. So even though you're focusing that experiment on moving sort of one focus thing, it's important to have that broader view of all of the different metrics that you're impacting, all of the different parts of the product that you're moving and changing with this change. Now, metrics in and of themselves, let's go to another example. Bounce rate. When people see the bounce rate go up, how do you feel? Any ideas? Like, raise your hand if you feel good about bounce rates going up usually. Okay, so very few hands raised, but sometimes they can be. So let's consider this view. What hours are the Washtenaw Dairy open? When we launched this on Google.com, we saw bounce rates really spike. And initially on opening up that dashboard, I got a little bit nervous and was like, oh no, abandonment's up, that's usually bad. But when you think about this change, it's really giving you the answer directly. And as we've, in a lot of ways with tech products, moved toward more direct answers, we have found also that's really much more satisfying to users than making them click through a bunch of little things. And so sometimes that bounce rate, which in a lot of cases is negative and generally we think is bad, can be good. And so that's why it's really important to have context around that metric to really understand it. So even if you have this whole dashboard of metrics, it's important to understand how to interpret them. And just like pilots go to school for a long time to understand how to interpret all of these, this gets back to building empathy with our users. And this is something I want to talk about of the way to contextualize all of those metrics is really to understand how they are impacting the people that those metrics represent. And that's really important. It's not just a click, it's someone who's either feeling like they're succeeding and getting closer or feeling frustrated with the experience that you've put in front of them. So going back into that sort of making a decision process, how do we decide if we've gotten better, were our experiments looking good, our experiments looking bad, how do we do that? Well, surveys, again, are a great tool, and sort of using some standard remarketing efforts with this between, say, like a control and our sort of standard base experiment. Let's just look at that big save button one. This is another place where you can target those surveys to users who saw each one, ask them that screening question to see if they were relevant to the journey you cared about, and ask them then that success question for your qualified users. And this is really nice because it's a way, if you have a sufficiently large sample and are able to sort of target these surveys to people, to directly compare that satisfaction in the task. And so if it's a more complicated thing that you can't measure the purchase directly in that A/B experiment, You can get people to tell you how they felt about it. You can get people to tell you whether they succeeded or whether they failed in this task, whether they were frustrated, whether they were happy. So that's one great way to just really bypass those clicks, views, abandonment, refinement rates, and look directly at whether you were successful with your users. Another version of this gets to in-product feedback. And this obviously is something that takes a little more time to build, like it's going to be a bit more investment. But it's another great way to give users either at a sampled rate, like pop this up in front of some percent, which may frustrate some users, but you can get some valuable feedback, and that's a trade-off you'll have to think about. Or just give them a reliable way to give you feedback within your experience. And that's one of the best ways to hear from really motivated people who either love and are excited about your experience or are pretty frustrated about it. And I will say from experience, you'll hear from a lot of folks who are very frustrated because these are the people who are motivated enough to go find that way to give you feedback and actually share it. And this isn't to say dismiss this. It is a biased sample, so I wouldn't use these necessarily quantitatively, but it's a great way to get insight into the specific things that people are frustrated with, because you can ask them to give you more raw feedback and describe their problems and challenges to you. And so you can get that insight into just what is it that they're running into, what is it that is causing frustration. And then finally, a third piece, which we've been leaning into a lot recently, is direct user action within the product. So one thing that we rolled out in Maps last year was our For You experience. So we focused on a lot of personalized recommendations and this feed, the For You feed of personalized content about your area, about areas you care about. Now, when someone's in that experience, some of the main actions you can take are scrolling through it or clicking on content. And so you might think our direct feedback is just going to be, did they scroll past the card or did they actually click on this thing? Now, that runs into some problems because we're trying to recommend real world places. And so, for example, when we're giving you a recommendation about a new business, let's say we're recommending it 2 weeks after this business opened, it pops up, you either scroll past it or you click it. Well, if you click it, you are probably interested in it. That's probably good. But if you scroll past, and maybe you were completely disinterested in it, maybe that was not something you actually cared about, maybe we should discard it. But on the other hand, maybe you just heard about it already from either some other source you read or from one of your friends. And maybe it was still a really great recommendation from you or for you, you just weren't interested in it at that moment. And that's why it can be really important to get a little bit more granular feedback. And so get that granular feedback on, no, this actually was not interesting at all. I've already been there, heard about it, was interested, but didn't need to take action on it, or take more direct action, save it for later. And so that's a way both to get that really granular user feedback on your experience, or for those who are sort of more on the machine learning path, one way that you can get really direct labeled data to improve your recommendations for later if you're building some sort of recommendation system. So in general, that way that I would say to really contextualize your metrics, understand success, just ask your users, be it through surveys, getting more in-product feedback, or taking more direct action. Understanding how your users feel is one of the best ways to understand if you've been successful and if you're helping them. And that's really how you're going to win that retention, win that dedication to your product, and win that advocacy to other people to come use it. So thanks very much. Do we have